Welcome everyone. I'm delighted to have Sally Guy from WCC here today. We're going to be talking about the human aspect of contracting, which is a subject really dear to my heart. Sally, do you want to introduce yourself and introduce WCC?
Alistair, thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm delighted to be here with you. So I'm Sally Geyer, and I'm the Global CEO of World Commerce and Contracting. We are a nearly 25-year-old now not-for-profit organization, headquartered in the US, but with a global membership. We have around 80,000 members around the world now. And as a professional body, we have a vision statement of a world where all trading relationships deliver social and economic benefit. So really everything that we do, the training and education, the research, the community that we foster is all with that big vision statement in mind.
Great. I've worked with you since Psych started 8 years ago, when it wasn't even called Psych, it was just me. It's been great working together. We were just discussing before we started the recording about the organization, and I think that, you guys have achieved really great things. As someone who's interested in subject matter, I think there are two things that stand out. One is the sense of community, which is really strong. And a network of people working in similar roles who are available and very happy to pass on the benefit of their knowledge and experience and help each other out really with similar subject matters. And I think also the depth of information that's available, and depth and quality. I still today, having done the job or been in the industry for at least 20 years, probably longer, I still use it as my first reference point. So it's really helpful. If I'm training AI how to use a contract, how to review a contract, I'd be looking at some of your best practice guidelines as a start point. So it's great. Today, we're going to talk about the human side of contracting. Just to briefly introduce the subject, I think we've been having some great discussions over the past couple of weeks about how the human aspect of contracting is often not doesn't receive much attention. It's never part of a business case to improve the contracting process, to digitize the contracting process. It's something that doesn't actually get discussed too often formally, but actually informally it's discussed all the time, because whether you're a user of the contracts process or you're a participant, there's a lot of dissatisfaction. It's regarded as dysfunctional, not user-friendly. Sally, give me your thoughts on the subject.
Well, there's so much to say on this, Alistair, and I think I'm going to go back to what you were talking about in terms of World CC and the community. And back to our origins. I mean, Tim Cummins founded the association back in 1999 because he recognized that there were these sort of pockets of people who were doing contracting, whether it was on the buy side or the sell side, pre-award or post-award, and they were just operating in splendid isolation. So the association was founded to provide that home and provide a community, and also to create that sort of educational awareness as well, and a common body of knowledge. But it's really fascinating, as that community has grown over the last 25 years, the importance that it holds for every individual that participates. And we were touching on that, talking about how valuable people find the events and find the whether they're in person or virtual, coming together. And yes, it's a very sharing and caring community. So providing that recognition for people who work in this space, in the field of commercial and contract management, has been really, really important. So, you know, the human element has always been really at the core of everything that we have done and do as an association. But you're right that that human element, sadly, does seem still to be lost, lacking. You know, what we know from our research, and again, it's so lovely to know that that research is powerful for you. There's so many data points that I could cite now, but we know, for example, that the number one priority for our community is to deliver strategic value. That's a desire that individuals and teams have to deliver strategic value to their organization, but they're constrained from doing so because of operational overload. People are burdened and struggling. And, you know, yes, unfortunately, we forget about that user experience, that professional experience, and it has a huge and profound impact. We know that somewhere in the region of 40% of this community is planning on exiting their role over the next 2 to 5 years. Now, of course, in some instances, that's going to be because people are retiring, or you know, they're using this role as a stepping stone into something else. That's true, but there's a big cadre of people who are fed up, who are really, but you know, burned out, and they're dissatisfied with the fact that they are not being supported effectively to address the operational overload that they're experiencing, and then they don't feel valued.
And a big driver of that operational overload, from my own experience, but also it might not be formally discussed at your member meetings and the summits that you hold, but it's certainly discussed over coffee in the bars afterwards, in more informally, is that often, particularly within large organizations, the contract process is so dysfunctional.
Yep.
I mean, I sometimes give a presentation about my time at ASDA and what prompted me to try and engineer improvement to the contracts process. And one of the things, by way of example, I always say is that when I was back at ASDA in 2012, the sword of Damocles hung over every contract. So I'd work for months to get something, you know, from inception to drafting it to working with the various stakeholders to negotiating it. And then we go to the approval process, and someone somewhere would kill it. And that's so dispiriting, all of that time and effort wasted. But you know, that in itself is one example. It's a product of dysfunction.
Yeah.
Why not put the approvals at the outset, for example? And yet it remains today in 2023, nearly 2024, standard practice that approvals come at the end of the
very
process
end,
rather than the start. So that's just one example. It is really annoying. And then I think the point that I was making, you mentioned user experience, but I guess the users of a contracting process, the internal customers, so not your community members, but the people who would be engaging with the legal and the contract management function. It's such a bewildering process, because you know, they come to the team with a deal, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, enthusiastic that they are furthering the interests of the company and probably their own interests too. And suddenly they're met with what is often a Byzantine, incomprehensible process that they have to deal with, you know, possibly for the first time, or maybe it's irregularly, they have to deal with, you know, bizarre legal language and jargon. They have to go through this horrendous process of interacting with often lawyers to draft a contract. The horrendous and totally illogical redlining process to deal with, where they'll be sent like a red blind version of a contract to say, are you happy with this? I don't even know what it means.
Yeah.
And then the approval process, and then even when everything's done and dusted, it's signed, what happens to the contract? And the reality is it goes somewhere in the ether. We had one customer who came to us and said, look, I want to create a contract database. And we said, well, where are your existing contracts? And they said they're spread across the
Everywhere.
organization. But to which I said, well, do you use e-signature? Do you use DocuSign? Yes. And do you sign all your contracts via DocuSign? Yes. Well, they're all on DocuSign, so you have them in one place. So this is the absolute crazy thing, is they actually had all of their contracts in one single repository anyway. They just weren't using it. It's It's so.
It is incredibly fascinating. I mean, we talk about contracting being the least reformed business process in any organization. Yeah. And that is because, as you have observed, it is so utterly fragmented. It's got, the contracting process, when you look at it in its fullest form, and again, you have to consider it that in organizations, you've got a buy side and a sell side, you've got a pre-award and a post-award, and you've got multiple different owners of different parts of the process. And it's fragmented, siloed, and really difficult to create that sort of clarity and that golden thread that needs to run through all of that. We do see higher performing organizations really focus on that process and integrate a lot of those, the buy, sell, pre-post activities. To your point about the user community, I mean, yes, that's absolutely true. And again, our research tells us that on average, an organization has about 26% of its workforce in somehow involved, engaged with the contracting process. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of people who won't have had a legal education, for example. And we talk about designing for users in so many contexts, but unfortunately, contracting isn't really one of them. And then, and I could talk and wax lyrical about design and simplification, not just of contract terms, but of the processes that you get people to participate in and use as well. So certainly that's a really, really important element. And then you also, yes, you touch on the what happens when the contract gets signed. If you're lucky enough for the contract to get signed, where does it go? That too many organizations celebrate at that point of contract signature when the work hasn't even started, although it feels like, because we've gone through a gargantuan and tortuous process of getting to signature, that's the end of the road. But of course, again, our research tells us value is won and lost in that post-award environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's logical. And see, you've said to me in the past, when you engage with your members, I think that, and you talk about driving digital change and improvement, that one of the obstacles to that is the fragmented nature of the process, that there's no single oath. And it's definitely the case if you look at the high performing teams that we're both aware of. I think it's fair to say in most cases it's usually due to one or two inspirational individuals who are they just get out there and they bring everyone together. But likewise, I think it's interesting that often when those individuals leave or move on, everything falls apart again. Yeah. I think we discussed trying to influence the community and trying to make change. I think that the way forward is actually to be less reliant on magical individuals and more reliant on saying to the contracting stakeholders, put the user first.
Yeah.
put the user first. And because I think actually then ownership becomes less of an issue, and you're just saying, okay, look, from a from a sales or procurement professional's perspective, someone who's a regular user of the contracting process, they just want to get their deal done quickly.
Yeah.
And then optimally, they would want to have access to their deal to be able to manage it on an ongoing basis. And really nothing else matters to them. The contracting process is just something that helps them achieve that. And so we need to get it as slick and simple as possible.
Yeah, you need to empower people. That is, people want to be able to self-serve in this environment. It's really important. So, that responsible empowerment is a really important element of a role of a contracting professional, I think. I think the other thing, Alistair, that I've been thinking about in all of this as well is how people feel about the experience. And you talked about the negotiation, and you're really excited because you've done this wonderful deal for your organization, and you go to your contracting team, whoever they might be, and it becomes this horrible, dreary process. And we go back to education. I mean, I, like you, trained originally as a lawyer. I remember my contract law modules being all about failure. It was all about all these terrible things that had gone wrong. And again, we know from our research that our community has this kind of preventist approach, that they believe that their role is about preventing bad things from happening to their organization. And that comes with it a kind of a sense of, I don't know, depletion and being demoralized. It's but it's because it's the way people have been educated in this space, that's what they've got to do, stop bad things from happening. You imagine if you change that mindset to one which is, my role is to create fabulous outcomes for my organization, the people within it, and the organization as a whole. It's a completely, it's a reverse mindset, but it's a really powerful and wonderful one. If we were thinking about outcomes and how do I use this phrase all the time, we contract for the divorce instead of for the marriage.
Yeah.
How do I turn and create and how do organizations create an environment where the outcome comes first, and designing for success outweighs the fear of failure?
Yeah, get what you're saying. It's a cultural shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a positive mindset.
And a far happier place to be, a far nicer environment for humans to be working in, when you're really focused on the positive rather than this fear of failure constantly.
Yeah, I mean, what you described is interesting, because I believe some of your members, some of the people we work with, would regard value creation in that context as stealing a march on the third party they're negotiating with, by including things or sneaking things in through a red line. That's not what we're talking about, to be clear. We're talking about value creation through getting a deal done quickly, being transparent and open, making the contractual data available for ongoing management, having healthy discussions about success and failure based on objective information, rather than I think that's something everyone can get behind. And it's interesting to go on to the next point, which we made while we were prepping, is you never see any of this stuff in a business case, do you? It's all about efficiency, or we'll be able to get rid of these people, or
cost savings.
And yet that's maybe why so many of these improvement programs, particularly the big CLM digitization programs, that's maybe why they fail, is because they're not
putting the user first. Yeah.
They don't think of because if you're a customer in the contracting process, like it doesn't really you're not really too fussed about whether the legal or contract team becomes more efficient or not. You probably like Fred, who is your contract liaison point. You don't want them to get rid of him. There's no interest in that. That's not something to get behind, is it?
Yeah, and as a user, you want Fred to be a happy, smiley person, who's eager and willing to support, as opposed to coming with the woes and moans and groans of how difficult life is, and how he hasn't got time to help.
Yeah. So I think just my ad would be just trying to make. I mean, it's a noble objective, isn't it? But if I was starting a change program in a large contracting function now, I think one of the key objectives would be, just as my ex-boss Alex Simpson gave me this objective when I was at Asda, is try and make this thing as easy to use as an iPhone.
Yeah.
No training required, totally logical process, totally user experience focused.
Yeah.
And that's something everyone will naturally get behind.
Completely. And you'll end up with an environment of probably far greater compliance, because you're making it easy for people. So you're actually achieving the outcomes that you would want and need to achieve. And I think it is really interesting. I've thought about it a lot since we started talking about this, is sort of, why isn't the employee experience a factor in a business case for digitization? It's actually, it's bonkers that it isn't.
Yeah, so I guess the call to action is probably let's I think for everyone, for all the members, everyone watching this, I do think if you're thinking about, or you're already embarked on a contract process improvement program, a CLM program, a digitization program, I guess it is. I think it's critical to think user first, and I think if you do that and you capture that in a sensible design, you can't really go far wrong. I think it's the process, the project, the improvements far more likely to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And you're far more likely to retain and gain the team that you need, and that's a really important element. We talked at the beginning about the churn of people, the mass exodus, and this is an environment that can't afford a mass exodus of people, because people are absolutely critical. All of the AI conversations at the moment, and the prospect of AI replacing everybody, I find it extraordinary. Yes, definitely it's going to be a game changer, and it's going to, if used correctly, improve actually what we do. But the humans remain a really, really critical element of this entire process, and we have to make sure that we're creating an environment where they can be successful.
Yeah, I always keep on telling people that AI is theoretically helpful. Certainly, it's very helpful to me in my day job. But I think the challenge is, who's going to tell the AI what to do?
Yeah.
Our experiences of looking at the contracting processes of your members is that they're generally, from a design perspective, they're deficient.
Yeah.
There's a lack of objective, there's a lack of continuous improvement, there's no measurement, there's no human-centered design. So I think AI is going to be helpful, but you know, we need to think about what we're going to ask kids to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
That's been wonderful. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Well, lots more. This conversation can go on and on, but thanks, Alistair. It's been really lovely chatting.
Great. Thank you, Sally.